Umapati Hegde and Dr. Devdatta Chafekar. So with that, and of course, we can take privilege of having words of wisdom from our senior most chairperson. So Alan, when we joined AKD, you were already a big name in nephrology. And we used to start with we were told by our registrar in medicine that whenever a CKD patient comes, start calcium lactate, aluminum hydroxide, and sodavin tablet. We never knew what's the meaning of that in CKD till we worked under you, and then we went through all from aluminum hydroxide to calcium carbonate to calcium acetate. I remember when calcium acetate was launched first time in Mumbai Nephrology Group at Alibag by a Mumbai-based company, and we all were there. I also remember those days when Sevelamer acetate was introduced by Encure, followed by Sevelamer carbonate. And I asked Mr. Yogesh Puri, who had introduced that drug, if you are going to introduce Sevelamer carbonate, why are you also selling Sevelamer acetate? Should we stop writing that? Then we went through all the things, ferric carbonate came, and then now we have SFO. So, Ellen, before I start my panel discussion, I would like you to have your opinion about all the phosphate binders. And of course, not to forget, there was an Indian study of nicotinic acid as a phosphate binder. So, Ellen, let's have your views before I put up the questions to the panelists.
Well, as you said, Hemant, I have gone through the entire spectrum of phosphate binder uses, but right from aluminum hydroxide, which fell by the wayside, it was an excellent phosphate binder. Then we went on to the calcium channel, or rather not calcium channel, but the calcium-based phosphate binders, which had their role to play. Of course, we also learned about the disadvantages of the calcium-based phosphate binders, and then on to lanthanum and Sevelamer. Lanthanum, for some reason, never really caught on, though it's an excellent, as we were shown by the Donald Malwani in his presentation when he showed the phosphate binding capacity of lanthanum was excellent. As of course, second only to the sucroferric hydroxide. And Sevelamer basically is now on up end. So basically it's Sevelamer most often, and in those patients who suffer from a pill burden and have to take a huge amount of the Sevelamer and have GI complications, I have started now to switch over to SFOH.
Thank you, Alan. So we now start with our panel discussion. So my first question is for Dr. Rishi Deshpande. Rishi, are you there? Rishi?
Rishi is there.
Yes, Rishi sir is there.
Rishi, so there have been several views which states that there are no mortality benefits from controlling hyperphosphatemia. So do you think it is true or not so true? And then if true, why bother about control of phosphorus only? Because many of the CKD patients anyway, at the time of diagnosis, already have a pre-existing vascular calcification. So what would be your view on that? Rishi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you could get the question?
No, sir, the audio was not clear.
Okay. Shall I repeat the question? So,
please, sir.
Okay, you can hear it now?
Yes, sir. Better.
Okay. Yeah. So, there have been opinions which state that there is no mortality benefit from controlling hyperphosphatemia. Do you think it is true or it is not so true? And if it is true, then why are we discussing and bothering to control phosphorus level? I mean, the CKD patients anyway have vascular calcification sometimes even at the time of diagnosis of CKD.
But I thought, sir, this issue is more or less laid to rest. That there was a trial with 12,000 odd patients, US CKD dialysis trial that clearly showed that having a phosphorus greater than 6.5 or having a calcium phosphorus product greater than 70 clearly had a increased mortality risk as compared to the group that was not having better phosphorus control. So I think, sir, phosphorus control is a very important part of CKD. I mean, we can look at phosphorus as a middle molecule to gauge the efficacy of dialysis. From there on, the hyperphosphatemia as a surrogate marker for vascular calcification, um, cardiovascular events. I mean, it's very much for real, and I think we must make all efforts to control phosphorus in our patients with CKD.
Okay. So having said that, let me come to Prashant. Are you there, Prashant?
Yes, sir.
Hi. There are iron-based phosphate binders. So we have ferric citrate and now SFO. So do they offer advantages over the currently available phosphate binders, especially in terms of in context of Indian practice? And then if that is so, how does SFO compare to ferric citrate in terms of phosphate binding and also an accumulation effect?
Thank you, sir. As we know that binding of phosphorus is essential, and if you look at the binding of phosphorus chemically to various compounds, there are two naturally very strong binding of phosphorus. One is with iron, and one is with calcium. These two bounds they bind phosphorus at multifold, and they have a very strong bond naturally as a chemical reaction. So when iron became a standard for phosphate binding, it started all with ferric citrate, followed by ferric oxyhydroxide. It became quite evident that one will score over the other. Ferric oxyhydroxide definitely offers more advantage over ferric citrate, because ferric citrate, because of its chemical nature, it tends to be more because of the microbial flora. It tends to be dissociated quickly than the sugar counterpart of the other ferric salt, and that leads to increased iron absorption in the distal part of the ileum. Therefore, when we use both these binders, especially ferric citrate, we are very worried about the iron accumulation. And we have seen that some patients who have been treated with ferric citrate on hemodialysis, they reach ferritin levels up to 10,000, causing significant liver damage in some. Uh, when we started using ferric or sucroferric oxyhydroxide, we have seen no changes in serum ferritin levels and the TSAT levels, and at the same time, a very sustained control of phosphorus because of its very strong binding effect, and a very on minimal dissociation in the intestine because of the microbial flora. And therefore I feel as compared to ferric citrate, ferric or sucroferric oxyhydroxide is a much better molecule to use. It is safe, except as we all know, it causes some amount of diarrhea and very little iron accumulation.
Thank you, Prashant. So now I'll move to the next question addressed to Sharad. Sharad, what is your selection criteria for starting phosphate binder? And then if you were to start with, will you use calcium-based, non-calcium-based, or iron-based? So basically what I'm trying to ask you is what patient profile in whom you think is suitable to start with SFO as a first choice?
Thank you, Hemant. I just want to say a few things to simplify my answer. The daily about load of phosphorus around 800 to 1000 milligrams. So the weekly load is around 7000 milligram, of which around 2400 is removed by dialysis and by residual renal function. So what we need to tackle is mainly 1800 milligram of phosphorus per week removal. That comes to 257 per day milligram. Now, Dr. Donald Monali had given head-to-head comparison, which I will simplify further. Calcium carbonate 1 gram combines 40 milligrams of phosphorus. Calcium acetate 45 milligrams of phosphorus. Sevlamar 1 gram combines with 36 milligrams. Aluminum, which we don't use these days, combines with 60 to 75 milligrams. And as the Dr. Allen also had said that length, and Dr. Donald, that lanthanum has second best to sucropheric. Lanthanum 93%, 93 milligrams of phosphorus. But sucropheric oxyhydroxide, 1 gram of it is capacity to bind 260 milligrams of phosphorus. So that is what we need. We need to see, basically we Indians are vegetarians, and the phosphorus load which is seen in Westerners is not so much in India, because most of our vegetarian food is legumes and it contains phytates, and humans cannot digest phytate. So our absorbed phosphorus load is 40% lesser than the Westerners. So even though I have said around 7000 milligram per week removal is very easy, even if you contemplate that as 257 milligram per day, then this sucropheric oxyhydroxide 1 gram, only 1 gram, that is 2 pills, easily has a phosphorus binding capacity of 260 milligrams, which is far, far superior and far beyond any other phosphorus binders. So I am contemporary to Dr. Ellen Almeida, our program director, and we all, Hemant, we all know that we started with aluminum, then calcium carbonate, acetate, then sevelamer hydrochloride, then sevelamer carbonate. Then this kid was not on the block at that time. If sucropheric oxyhydroxide was available in my time, I think we would have preferred upfront, as Dr. Maloney said, that all naive patients, even pre-dialysis patients, leave aside dialysis. So I would now say sucropheric oxyhydroxide scores much beyond all other phosphorus binders. And we don't have to use 3 per day, 2 per day is good enough for Indian patients because our phosphorus burden is not so much. Thank you, Hemant.
So again, I'll ask you as well as other panelists, whoever would like to answer this question, and which was asked by Alan as a last question. Actually, I was going to ask you the same, but he halted me and he took my words away from my mouth. So I would like to ask the same question as to how do we address this problem in the CKD non-hemodialysis patient. So Sharad, you can also
I think
answer.
Dr. Maloney has already said that in practice, though it is not FDA approved, he has used this, and probably we may go away with a single tablet of sucropheric oxyhydroxide per day. Dialysis patients may need 2 per day because at that CKD stage 5, the residual renal function is so poor and cannot remove that much of phosphorus. So maybe we need 2 tablets. But in pre-dialysis patients, I'm pretty sure then, and I would upfront use only 1 tablet a day. That would not give any loose motions or any big issues of discoloration of stools or other things. And we don't have to have a combination of phosphorus binders. Sucropheric oxyhydroxide per se is so potent. It is almost 5 to 6 times more potent than the phosphorus binders that we use today. And with all that pill burden, this does not require any consumption of liquid. It's chewable. Rather than consume 6, 8 or 10 tablets of sevelamer per day. And even Indians will look at the cost also. I think sucropheric oxyhydroxide 500 milligram tablet is costing 35 rupees. The same company who's manufacturing sucropheric oxyhydroxide makes a sevelamer, which is costing 22 rupees, 800 milligrams. So head-to-head comparison, if you have to use 2.4 to 4.8 milligrams of sevelamer a day, the cost is triple than when you use sucroferric oxyhydroxide. So you save on the cost, you give a chewable tablet, no need to take any liquid along with it. So no problem with liquid restriction. And the efficacy is almost 5 to 6 times more than any other phosphorus binders. So I would not, like Dr. Verghese had said, and raise that question, that all those difficult to control phosphorus with other phosphorus binders, then we add sucroferric oxyhydroxide. I mean, I would upfront use as a knife, as a number one, first phosphorus binder to start with because of all these advantages which I have said already. And one more point, just to add to what Dr. Prashant Rajput had said, for ferric citrate, the biggest problem with ferric citrate is the same age-old story of aluminum toxicity. The citrate increases aluminum absorption, and all those who have used ferric citrate for a long period of time have blended up with aluminum toxicity. So that was the biggest, apart from the ion overload, which Dr. Rajput has said already. So aluminum toxicity is the biggest drawback of ferric citrate. And sucroferric oxyhydroxide scores over it.
Anybody else would like to add to this as their own experience of using SFO in non-dialysis CKD patient? Any of the panelists would like to answer?
Dr. Hemant, sir, I have used it in non-diabetic patients when the people were requiring more than 6 tablets of sevelamer hydroxide, even though it was FDA not approved. Then I used in these patients with 2 tablets that we are able to control phosphate to less than 4.5 to 5. So their GI side effects initially was there, but it was not requiring any. He was having a constipation. We were using Tuflac for his constipation, which did not require after the use of SFO. So which his constipation also relieved after this, which was another advantage. And his phosphorus was well controlled.
Thank you. So we move to the next question. Tarun, are you there?
I am here, very much here.
Hi, yeah. So what are the current challenges and unmet medical needs in the management of CKD-MBD patients in our clinical practice?
So I think lots have been already mentioned. So phosphorus, calcium, PTH, everything, all these are part and parcel of medical bone disease, so mineral bone disease. So all these parameters needs to be regulated. So hypercalcemia is bad, hyperphosphatemia is bad, hyperparathyroidism bad, hypoparathyroidism bad. So all these are, but we do not have a single kind of a molecule which can take care of everything. We do not have. And the challenges which we face, you will approve, and several sessions we have discussed together that in India we see lots of hypocalcemia as well. And then one of the questions which you asked to one of the panelists, how do you determine which phosphate binder you are going to use? A simple way, I was thinking how I determine. So the simple way what I do is, I work at 2 places, one at corporate hospital, another one is charitable hemodialysis center, which is absolutely free. So for me, it becomes very easy. If I go to free charitable hemodialysis center, to me, it looks like calcium-based phosphate binder is the only option which I am left with. I know the adverse effect of calcium accumulation and all these things, but if their phosphorus are 6 and 7, do I have any other molecule in my hand? I don't have. And when I work in corporate, I forget about calcium-based phosphate binders. I straight away go to either SFO. Nowadays, I have a data of about 34 patients of SFO. And there are many substantial number of patients on sevelamer as well. So coming to your question of unmet needs, so these are the things. So SFO, I think, there was pleiotropic effect of SFO in one of the studies where they showed reduction in PTH as well, somewhat. So yes, by using SFO, you control the phosphorus. It probably helps in maintaining the PTH, but then you may need another molecule for PTH control. And as far as calcium is concerned, if you ask any Westerner, they will say whatever the calcium is, if the patient is not symptomatic, be it 6.5 or 7, you don't need to treat it. We do not have an evidence that lower calcium in India, 6.5, whether correction to 7.5 is going to help him or not. Unfortunately, we do not. We are concerned because of the numbers, but we do not have a practical or data to treat it or not to treat it. So there are several challenges in management of mineral bone disease. This is one new molecule which may help assist, and I agree with previous panelists and the talk that SFO, in my experience also, I'll tell you the data briefly in 2 lines, 34 patients which I analyzed, dig up today itself. The phosphorus, mean phosphorus prior to start of SFO was 6.3, and 3 months after the SFO was 4.4, and the mean reduction in phosphorus was 1.47, which is not bad actually, which is not bad. And there are other data I'm not going to go into detail, but SFO, I agree, is a good molecule. It is, again, I agree with Dr. Sharath. What I did is I stopped several patients on sevelamer who were taking 6 tablets a day, and that was cost saving as well, actually. So per pill, it may be higher, but overall treatment is cheaper as compared to sevelamer, which is less efficacious.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarun. So my next question would be to Umapati. So in your current practice, Umapati, when and how would you switch patients to this novel phosphate binder? So say, like all of us were using calcium acetate or calcium carbonate or even sevelamer. And now because this molecule is available, so do we start switching each and every patient whom we see in OPD to this, or do we use some criteria to decide, forget the cost aspect?
If the patient is diabetic, already have a calcification, the best choice is a non-calcium based phosphate binder. If the patient is taking, if it's uncontrolled, definitely I need to change it. Or if it is requirement is more than 4 or 6 tablets, then I change it to an SFO, which requires only 2 to 3 tablets a day. So in all others, if it is well controlled, I don't, because there is no, as of today, there is no RCTs which shows that one is superior over the other. And the mortality benefit is, there is no RCT as of today. But yes, we need to control the calcium and phosphorus, and if it has to be done, so it's already well controlled and requiring only around 3 tablets, then I don't change it for just for the sake of it. I will continue, and I'll advise him to eat properly and avoid or ionic or inorganic phosphate which is already there in all these canned foods, and also the stored foods which are available, which is, and the cold drinks which are available, which are very, very high content. So which get absorbed almost around 90% as compared to the vegetable, which is only absorbed around 30% or less than that. So I don't change it in everyone. If it is uncontrolled, requiring more than 4 to 6 tablets, and if it is diabetic, then definitely I'll change it.
Hello. Yeah. So this could be a question for you as well as for anybody else as to how often do we in our practice need to transit to another phosphate binder? I mean, is it very common? Is it?
So it's only around 10 to 15% of patients were totally uncontrolled, because even he said less than 5.5 phosphorus in only around 45-50% of patients. Even a vegetarian diet, it is not so common to have very high phosphorus with phosphate binders. So it's only around 15 to 20% of the patients we require a change, where require more than 6 tablets a day. Otherwise, they are reasonably well controlled with 3 to 5 tablets, 3 to 4 tablets of other sevelamer 800 tablets. So if there is a GI disturbances or anything, then it is, you can use this. But again, this also has the initially has loose motion which settle down over time.
Can I?
Yeah.
In my experience, whenever there is a requirement or need for a change or sudden changes in phosphorus levels, I have found on interviews that mostly these patients become non-compliant in using the phosphate binders. Then only suddenly, when the phosphorus was 4.5, suddenly jumps up above 6.57. And when you ask them, they will say that, okay, they forgot or they did not take the phosphate binders. Otherwise, I agree with Dr. Umapati that frequent changes are not required unless there is non-compliance associated with it. And we had a letter to editor also published in regards to adherence, where we pointed out this point, this subject.
Can I say something, Hemant?
Yeah, Nitin.
Yeah, so in my experience in pre-dialysis patients, I have seen that in spite of good compliance, we find that the effectivity of some phosphate binders may not be the same. In that case, we do need to change. So I have had to change in spite of good compliance in pre-dialysis patients. I have not seen it in dialysis patients.
So another question before Nitin, I come to you for the last question. One more common question. How often have any one of us or ever used nicotinamide as a phosphate binder? Anybody has an experience with that?
So we did a trial of around 50 patients as nicotinamide, which was sustained release patient which has come. It significantly reduced the phosphate, and also the FGF23 also it's reduced significantly. But only thing was flushing.
What was the dose used?
So the 1000 milligram tablets which was available, which was used as a sustained release preparation.
Yeah, because the study which came from Dr. Sampath Kumar, they stated that only 375 milligram is enough. Unfortunately, 375 milligram tablets are not available at the moment.
So now the sustained release are available, which we used it. So, but again, the flushing is still a common problem. Almost around 15 to 20% of the patients, after around a week, they said they denied to continue it.
Of course, now there are non-flush tablets also supposed to be.
Probably the other phosphorus binders will upregulate calcium phosphorus 2B transporter. And nicotinamide uniquely works by inhibiting the sodium phosphorus transporter. So probably that is an edge of nicotinamide as a phosphorus binder over other phosphorus binders. If we can, as we say, 375 per day with non-flushing complications, probably it is a welcome phosphorus binder.
Yeah, because the cost advantage is also there, and if it works well, that could be a good option.
And again, it increases the HDL cholesterol also.
Okay, so that's another advantage of lipid improvement in lipid profile is an added advantage. Okay, come to the next question, Nitin. So what do you think about the advantages of SFO over currently available phosphate binders such as Sevelamer? Is SFO a cost-effective alternative? Sharad has already alluded to it in part. In CKD, 5 HD patients for phosphate control and similarly for non-HD patients.
I think we have already discussed all these issues, but just to reiterate to a few points. One is that as compared to Sevelamer, of course, the foremost issue is the pill burden. And we already know that the pill burden is much lower. As far as the cost effectiveness is concerned, there are some Western publications also in the NHS in the UK to say that that was in the Journal of Pharmacoeconomics. And what they have said is that it is supposed to be more cost effective as compared to the other phosphate binders. One is of course related to the number of pills to be swallowed, but also to the basic cost itself because it's iron based. Then the other thing as far as cost effectiveness in India is concerned, I think Sharad has already talked about it in detail, and we hope that it's going to be cost effective to our patients also. I think 2 points which were less discussed was about the vascular calcification per se, and what happens even in the other non-calcium based phosphate binders to vascular calcification. So we know that with calcium-based phosphate binders, you do have vascular calcification as a problem. And there are enough studies to show that that's going to be detrimental as far as the final outcome is concerned because of the cardiovascular calcification. Now, if you compare the vascular calcification between Sevelamer and the SFO, there are a few data in animal studies as well as 1 or 2 clinical studies where they have shown that the aortic calcification is supposed to be slightly lesser with SFO as compared to Sevelamer over a long period of time. And there was one interesting study some time ago to say that the reduction in FGF23 levels was much earlier as in the SFO group as compared to the Sevelamer group. So the reduction was seen as early as first 3 months of therapy as compared to Sevelamer, which was seen at say up to 1 year of therapy. And of course, the reduction in FGF23 was slightly erratic in the cevimeline group as compared to the SFO group. So probably the vascular calcification issue, even in our patients, may be addressed by this molecule as compared to cevimeline. And there are two things which were shown in Dr. Donald's slides also. One is about the slightly higher incidence of metabolic acidosis with cevimeline. I do not know the mechanism for that, but that is what is mentioned in the literature. And of course, the essential vitamins, they're also bound by cevimeline, which may not happen with the SFO. So these are the, and Tarun already mentioned about the pleiotropic effects. So these are the advantages of this molecule over cevimeline, besides the pill burden and the cost. And maybe we'll be using it more and more in both pre-dialysis and the dialysis patients, both as a group together.
Thank you, Nitin. And I think that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. And if any other comments are there from anybody, they're welcome. Otherwise, I will hand over to our chairperson, Dr. Almeida. Ellen, are you there? Is he there?
I am there.
Yeah, so please wind up.
That I think I would have left it to you. Anyhow, the well, you have gone through the journey of phosphate binders in the management of chronic kidney disease patients, and we do have SFOH, as we call it, which seems to be a good addition to our therapeutic armamentarium. As I have just only used it in dialysis patients, the non-dialysis segment I have not yet, because there doesn't seem to be any published data on the same. And yes, off-label use is a possibility, but we do, in this environment which we're working in, it always becomes an issue. You don't know what could be around the corner for you if you have used anything off-label. Having said this, we have other medications which were till a short time ago off-label, and now with the DCGI permitting it, we have, I'm mainly talking about SGLT2 inhibitors, not of course for phosphate binding, but as an example of how what was considered as off-label use has now come into the realm of on-label use. So with that, I think we have a good product. The only problem is we still have an untackled segment of the non-dialysis CKD patients. Second thing is the mild side effects which are there with this drug, but the main thing is the cost factor, especially if you looking at it in comparison to the cheaper brands of cevimeline which is available, this will be way out expensive. But even if you have put patients on cevimeline, they don't necessarily take the load which you have prescribed to them. And you do find patients who have persistent high levels of phosphorus. So those are the ones which we need to tackle with this drug. With that, I have nothing more to add. I'm sure there would be others. Nitin, I think that cevimeline hydrochloride was the one which had the acidosis part, not the cevimeline carbonate part. Yeah. Okay. Back to you, Amat. And
So thank you, everybody. Thank you, chairperson. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. Thank you, Emcure, for having arranged for this session. And
thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. From entire behalf of Emcure family, I would like to thank Dr. Ellen Almeida, sir, for his valuable time and Dr. Hemant Mehta sir, Dr. Javadekar sir, Dr. Prashant Rajput sir, Dr. Umagati Hegde sir, Tiloka sir,
Thank you, Dr. Sharat Seth, sir, Dr. Rishi Pandey, sir.
for their valuable times. I'm sure, like, this is a new kid on the block, but with help of all the nephrology fraternity, I'm sure there is a lot to explore about this product. And we as a company, MCure, are also looking at how we can benefit a patient's life through this particular drug. Sir, I'm sure, like, we will organize such a more scientific event in future. Once again, on behalf of MCure family, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you so much, sir, for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.